Welcome to the Bucklesberry Lemonade Podcast. I'm your host this evening, Tim Eubanks. Tonight, we're going to talk about some of the most bizarre, unsolved true crime mysteries that I've been researching lately. Our goal tonight is to just follow the weird threads that link the unsolved, the unidentified, and the unbelievable. First up, we've got a frantic 911 call from Texas. And then staying in the great state of Texas, a baffling missing persons case. How did a woman completely vanish from a nursing home? And then finally, a New Jersey scandal that literally took place under an apple tree. So if you're ready, let's dive right in. All right, let's dive into our first case. We're going way out to West Texas for this one, to a stretch of blacktop that just eats secrets alive. This is the vanishing of Brandon Lawson, a 26-year-old father of four. And the core of this entire mystery, well, it's less about what we don't know and more about the single frantic 5-minute thing we do have. It was the night of August the 9th, 2013. Brandon was driving from his home in San Angelo down U.S. Route 277. He had just had an argument with his live-in girlfriend, and according to her and his brother, Kyle, Brandon was just going out to clear his head. But sometime around 1 a.m., he ran out of gas near a tiny little place called Brant, Texas. And we do know between 12:50 a.m. and 1:15 a.m., Brandon was frantically trying to connect with the outside world. He called his brother Kyle, his girlfriend, and his neighbor. But his phone reception was terrible, and many of those calls, they went straight to voicemail. Now this is, again, where the timeline fractures. Around 1:18 a.m., Kyle calls Brandon back. And this time, Brandon answered. Kyle says his brother sounded out of breath and he actually claimed he was bleeding. And immediately after that, Brandon makes the call that defines his case forever. He calls 911.
Emergency.
Yes, I'm in the middle of the field. It's like we're just pushed some guys over. Right here going towards Javelin on both sides. My truck ran out of gas. There's one car here. You got to take the bitch to the woods. Please learn.
Okay, now run that
The
line.
one I talked is home. I surely ran into him.
Ah, you ran into him. Okay.
That's the first guy.
You need an ambulance?
Yes, no, I need the call.
Okay. Is anybody hurt? Hello?
As you can tell, the dispatcher answers the 911 call, and Brandon starts talking, actually shouting. The recording is a chilling mess of panic, wind noise, and static. What's clear is the desperation in Brandon's voice. He does say he ran out of gas. He does sound incredibly distressed, and he mentions being chased. Now the dispatcher asks, does he need an ambulance? But he says no, he needs the cops. And then the call abruptly ends, and after 1:19 a.m., all calls to Brandon's phone go straight to voicemail. And we do know that around 12:56 a.m., a trucker called 911 to report Brandon's truck, which is parked in a pretty dangerous manner on the road. So after this point, things instantly get complicated. Shortly after 1 a.m., a sheriff's deputy actually arrives at Brandon's truck. But Brandon wasn't there. And then, around 1:10 a.m., Brandon's brother Kyle arrives. Now get this. Kyle was actually on the phone with Brandon while he was standing right next to the deputy. And Brandon told him, "I can see you. I'm right here." But neither the deputy nor Kyle could see us all. Now, this detail, it's huge because at that time, Brandon had an active arrest warrant. And Kyle figured Brandon must have just been hiding from the deputy. So Kyle, trying to help, drove just a short distance up the road and parked, waited for the deputy to drive off. And he waited. He just waited for Brandon to appear. But Brandon never showed up. So Kyle, being the good brother, left the gas can in the back of the truck and went home. But Brandon was just gone. And Kyle, being the good brother and sensing something was just off, he came back around 5 a.m. and was shocked to see Brandon's truck just still sitting there. By 8 a.m., the truck was towed, and Brandon, it seemed, had just vanished into the vast, desolate West Texas darkness. The sheer effort to find him, well, that became the story for 9 long years. The case was a classic example of traces, places, and cases. The trace, the garbled 911 call, and the bizarre last words to his brother, "I'm right here," are the single maddening traces. Was he really hiding from the deputy? Was he really bleeding and running from whoever he claimed was chasing him? And the place, of course, well, that's U.S. Route 277 itself. The land itself has become the killer's accomplice, if there is a killer. Then 7 years later, in February 2022, a break finally took place near a large patch of brush about a mile from where Brandon's truck was originally found. Searchers located clothing and human remains. And finally, in December 2024, the DNA testing confirmed the truth. The remains were indeed Brandon Lawson's. His family finally had the closure of knowing where he lay. But the story doesn't end there, because the case does remain cold. Authorities have stated they suspect foul play, and they are listing this as a suspected homicide. The person or people who caused Brandon to run, the reason he was so frantic on the 911 call, and the exact cause and circumstances of his death, they're still locked away in that West Texas dirt. The silence is broken only by the echo of his final terrifying plea for help. Up next, we'll stay in Texas and go back in time to 1986 to discuss a strange missing person case from, of all places, a nursing home. Stay with us. All right, let's leave the desolate Texas highways of Brandon Lawson's for just a moment. And let's move a little further north to Sherman, Texas. And let's step back in time to 1986. This isn't a case about being chased on a dark road. It's a case about a quiet, complete, and terrifying vanishing from a place where Miss Ruby should have been completely safe. A nursing home. This is the story of Ruby Akers. Miss Ruby was 75 years old in January of 1986. She was a fixture in her community. She had run a laundromat business for years and was known for being very independent. She wasn't living at the Sherman Nursing Center permanently. No, she was only there temporarily because she had dislocated her shoulder and she was healing up from a fall. And while her family admitted she sometimes did have moments of confusion, well, Miss Ruby was mentally capable of living all on her own. The place? So Miss Ruby, she's at this nursing center, recovering. And this is where the bizarre timeline starts. Just before she disappeared, Miss Ruby had cut her finger and had to get stitches. On the afternoon she vanished, sometime around 3 p.m., she went to the nurse's station, and her and the nurse had a conversation about those stitches being removed. The nurse told her,
"Give me about 10 minutes, Miss Ruby. I have to check on another patient. Then I'll be right with you."
Okay, sweetheart. Thank you.
10 minutes. That's all it took. The nurse went to check on Miss Ruby, and her room was empty. Ruby Akers was gone. Now, why is this so strange? Her eyeglasses and her dentures, two things a 75-year-old woman is not willingly going to just leave behind if she's just stepping out. Well, those items were still in her room. And even more chilling, the sweater that she always wore, her favorite one, it was still hanging there in her closet. And it was January in Texas. You don't go for a walk without your coat or your sweater. Miss Ruby was known to enjoy walks, though, but the extensive search of the area, of the woods, of the town, well, that search, it turned up absolutely nothing. It was clean, silent, an impossible disappearance from a supervised facility. Now, the trace, or maybe we should say the whispers, now that's the real mystery. The trace that makes this case so haunting, well, it came later. It wasn't found in the dirt or in the woods or even on her clothing. It came through the telephone line. After Miss Ruby vanished, her family received a few anonymous phone calls, and they were terrifying calls. The caller, or maybe callers, claimed that Miss Ruby Akers hadn't walked out at all. They claimed she had died inside the nursing home after being accidentally given an overdose of Thorazine, a powerful antipsychotic drug. This caller alleged that her body was then hidden to cover up the fatal error. Now, the authorities, they've never been able to confirm this information. And the caller or callers, well, they've never been identified. It's a shocking rumor, an unsourced whisper. But it does offer a chilling motive. Maybe Miss Ruby Akers didn't disappear on her own. Maybe she was made to disappear. Was her body quietly taken out of the building and disposed of? All because of a fatal 3 p.m. dose of medication? The case, the unsolved silence. The Sherman Nursing Center story is that Miss Ruby simply walked away. But wouldn't that story in itself bring scrutiny to that facility? One would think so. And then there's the family's tragedy. The anonymous, untraceable claim that something much darker happened. And then there's the truth. Like Miss Ruby Akers herself, that truth remains lost somewhere in the Texas cold of 1986. You have a woman who's capable and independent, yet she leaves her critical personal items behind. Then you have a rumor of a desperate cover-up. It does make one wonder. Did the staff actually search the facility before they called the police? Or did the cover-up start the very second Miss Ruby asked for those stitches to be removed? Miss Ruby Akers' case remains unsolved. A perfect, chilling, and baffling example of how sometimes the quietest and most watched places can keep the loudest secrets. We've done the frantic Texas highway, and we've done the missing from a watched facility. For our final story, let's go up the coast and step back in time to the roaring 20s, to New Brunswick, New Jersey. We're moving from mysterious wanderers to very well-known society figures. This is the case of the Reverend Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills. The Hall Mills murder. And it's a perfect example of how high society, forbidden passion, and a tidal wave of wealth can keep a murder perfectly unsolved for a century. The place the bodies were found in September 1922, not in a back alley, but in a secluded, notorious area known as Lover's Lane, on an abandoned farm property. Specifically, they were found lying together under an old, sprawling crab apple tree. The Reverend Hall, he was 39 years old, the rector of the Episcopal Christ Church. Eleanor Mills, she was only 34, a talented choir singer at the very same church. And you guessed it, they both were married, but not to each other. They were deeply involved in a secret, forbidden affair. The case, the bodies were found 4 days after they went missing. Both had been shot in the head. Eleanor was shot 3 times, and her throat had been cut. It was a horrific, frenzied crime. But here's the bizarre, deeply symbolic staging. The killer had not only murdered them, but he had laid the Reverend's arm over Eleanor's neck, and most damningly, had scattered his love letters all over his body. The scene wasn't just a crime. It was a public execution of their love affair. Now, the immediate suspects, they were obvious. Of course, the jilted spouses. Eleanor's husband, James Mills, he was quickly cleared. Then the focus landed squarely on the Hall family, specifically the Reverend's wife, Frances Noel Stevens Hall, who came from old money and owned a massive estate. And then there were the 2 volatile oddball brothers. Now here's the trace. This whole thing became a circus rather quickly. The case was a disaster from the very start. The police contaminated the scene. The Hall family's money, it immediately threw a protective shield around the suspects. But the public needed a story. And this is where the history folklore link comes in. This case wasn't just reported. It was actually the birth of the American media circus. Newspapers like the New York Daily Mirror hired planes to fly over the scene. They even give witnesses nicknames like the Pig Woman and the Corset Salesman. The press turned the whole thing into a grotesque daily soap opera about wealth, sex, and murder. The circus was so loud that it arguably drowned out the evidence. The family was brought to trial years later, driven by media and political pressure. But the only real evidence, well, that was the testimony from the so-called Pig Woman, Jane Gibson, who claimed she saw Frances Hall and her brothers at the scene. But her testimony was chaotic and questionable. The jury, they ultimately returned a verdict of not guilty. And just like that, the powerful Hall family walked scot-free. So the story of the Hall Mills murder ends under that old crabapple tree. It became a permanent, chilling symbol of the era. A time when the roaring headlines were louder than the justice system, and where a perfect crime, well, it could be bought, paid for, and protected by old money. The final trace in this case, it's not a 911 call or a code. It's the unsolved verdict. It's the painful question that still hangs in the air of New Jersey. Did the money, the power, and the family name silence the truth? And we've reached the end. We appreciate you being here with us this evening. And if you don't mind, how about giving us a like and maybe consider subscribing and maybe a comment if it's nothing more than just telling us where you're from. It would be greatly appreciated. Until next time, this is Tim Eubanks with the Bucklesberry Lemonade Podcast, reminding you to lock your doors, turn on your porch light, hug a loved one, and stay safe out there, guys.